Hey there, Knicks fans. How you doing? It's your boy, Jonathan Macri, with you for, no, it's not an emergency podcast, Robert Cross. It's just a regular old episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. But I don't know if it's just because, well, here's the exceptional podcasting introduction. I don't know if it's just because we have gone a while without some real basketball news that all of the Knicks community got a little tingle in our fannies tonight. But either way, I felt the need to talk to someone else who it's been a while for him between bouts of actual basketball, and I'll let him explain that and why we are recording at almost 11 o'clock at night. Benjy Ritholtz, how you doing, buddy?
I'm great, man. Just had a run for the first time in a month. I had a August of COVID and a pneumonia, and I had my finger 8 stitches in my finger. All happened in August, so I haven't.
Do I know anything. How you did that?
I don't want to talk about it, but it might have been a softball. It might have been a softball injury. Yeah, so it feels great. I feel great to have just played a little basketball. I'm in a basketball state of mind. I'm excited to talk about some small ball. Can we talk about some small ball?
Let's talk about some small ball. So for anybody who doesn't know, Steve Ashburner, who does great work for NBA.com, he's been covering the league for forever, conducted an interview with Tom Thibodeau. I don't know when the interview was conducted, but an article about the interview dropped on Tuesday. And I don't know, Benjy, I gotta these are things. This is the sort of interview that Tibbs is comfortable doing because he knows he's not. It was funny. Berman sent a tweet out. Shout out to Mark Berman after this drop that he's like, Tibbs doing an interview with NBA.com after he ignores all the beat reporters. He's not getting asked any of the tough questions about Mitchell Robinson's injury or this or that. I'm like, yeah, of course. That's why he does the interview, because he's not getting asked any bullshit questions. So this is he does this sort of thing happily. And there's a small part of me that's like, maybe we're all just making a big deal of this because Tibbs is smarter than he lets on, and he knows what people are talking about now. He knows what people want to hear. I got to tell you, though, Benj, we'll go through some of the quotes in a second. This, sitting down, really reading it, rereading it. I wrote an article for the newsletter about it. I think this is notable. Hashtag meaningful, if you will. What say you?
Agreed. I mean, it's actually pretty rare to hear Tibbs talk in more than just general basketball platitudes to the press. He'll generally just default to his classic lines that he says in every press conference over and over again. Rarely talk strategy, X's and O's. I know Fred a couple times last year got him to spill some beans, but generally his MO is to kind of stick to the basketball sayings that he loves most. And to hear him, look, it's a good job by Ashburner to ask questions, lead him in ways where he actually discussed plans, schematic plans for his team. And that's for all of the speculation that we all do in the offseason constantly about what the roster changes mean and how they're going to play and whether Tibbs is, well, he just heard it from the coach's mouth, and absolutely notable to hear him say, and we'll get into all the different things that he said, but to hear him openly say, yes, this is going to be part of the team's identity going forward, whether you could interpret it as a total it's the last thing that he wants to do, but the roster he's been given is that he has to do it. But you could interpret that interview as this is how he wants to play. Your opinions may differ. I'm curious to hear where you stand on how to interpret it. But he said it. He meant it. And that is absolutely notable that there's going to be small ball will be a part of the identity of this team going forward.
There's two conversations here, and you nailed it, Benjy, which is what he said, and we'll get into that. And that's where I'm really curious to hear what you have to say, but also why he said it. Because, and to be clear, there were some of the usual Tibbs bullshit in here. The last question he talks about is, he asked about his approach to the regular season, and he gives, I think this is a top top 5 Tibbsism about the habits you build over the course of a season. You have to build those habits in training camp and all that. But like the first, and again, I don't know how much this interview has been edited, but the very first question that is recorded here is like just a very, like it's a softball. It's what do you hope to carry over from last year's playoff exposure? Not even like what did you learn in last year's playoffs? Like what did you see in the playoffs? Maybe it's like what did you carry over from last year's playoff exposure? And then he gets immediately into, well, you know, getting OG back was big. McCall back, obviously getting Julius. We lost Isaiah, which was what we'll have to replace. But I think we have versatility where we could play smaller at times because of OG's ability to guard big. Julius and Hart can guard big as well. He is letting you know out of the gate, for whatever reason, I don't know exactly who he's talking to, but you have to ask that question, right?
It's fascinating. You're right, and looking at it with you right now, it is kind of funny how the question he didn't really ask about it. He just he volunteered it.
Yeah, he
volunteered it,
and he keeps going back to the well. So okay, we'll get back to like the theory behind this a little bit, but let's just actually talk about what he says. So I'm going to start here. First question, he says, we have the versatility where we could play smaller at times because of OG's ability to guard big. So right off the bat, he's telling you OG Anunoby gives us the ability to play. You know, I wrote an article a few weeks ago about like what's New York's death lineup, whatever you want to call it, where you don't necessarily have a traditional 5-man on the floor. So he mentions OG there, and he mentions OG a couple other times, but then he gets back to this topic later, and apologize, I'm scrolling to find it right now. A little bit later in the interview, he says, where he's asked explicitly, how do you begin to replace Hartenstein? He says, we will probably have to do it by committee. We'll look at some different things because we have versatility. We could see Julius more at the 5. I don't want to do it for long stretches. It would take its toll. But to have him do it for 10 or 15 minutes, and that really caught me. I was like, 10 or 15 minutes? That's a lot of minutes. That's more than. Has he ever gone, other than maybe games where they were getting, let's say they were down by like, we know the scenarios that it's happened. They're down by like 18 points with like 9 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, right? And it's like, all right, fuck it. Sure. Obi, go out there, run around a little bit with Julius. We'll see what happens. But like 15 minutes, I don't know that we've ever seen 15 minutes of, again, hashtag meaningful small ball. But again, that one with talking about Julius at the 5, and then he talks about the offensive advantages that this could create. So I'm just going to tee it up for you. Make heads or tails of this, what he's talking about from a basketball standpoint.
Yeah. You get Talmudic about it and really analyze each word. It's probably silly because he's doing an interview. He's probably, who knows, he might have been 2 wines in. Like, I don't know how careful he was being about every word that he said, but let's take it one at a time. So first thing he says is that OG has the ability to play big. So does, I think he says, Bridges and Hart, right?
It's weird because he talks about Bridges and Hart in the context of guarding the ball handler and the versatility that those guys guarding the ball handler, as opposed to DiVincenzo guarding the ball handler, allows.
But on the first quote, he says, after he says OG can guard big, he also says, right, Bridges and Hart can guard big as well.
Julius and Hart can guard big as well. Yeah.
So it's funny. I think Hardy's just trolling. Like, I'm convinced he hopes Josh Hart sees this and is like, oh, Josh Hart's going to guard the centers. I'm like 86% sure that's what he's doing.
It might be.
But OG, okay, like, and again, it's in the context of a question about the playoffs, right? So let's flash back to the playoff moment where this actually happened, even though Isaiah Hartenstein was in the playoffs and an important part of that team. You flash back to the Philly game where OG's on Joel Embiid. Precious Achiuwa's kind of roaming around, creaking havoc, and it actually won them a ball game. So to me, if the question was, what did you learn from the playoffs? And his answer is, well, OG can guard big. That means we can play small. That's the game I'm looking at. And that, honestly, the first part of the quote, the first part of the playing small quote with OG as the focus was more exciting to me than the second. If OG is guarding the big, and we could go in so many different ways here, like what the difference in the way he explained it to me illustrates the different options they have to go small, which is really exciting. There are multiple iterations of a small lineup that I think he's getting at. It could be with or without Julius. Now, if you have OG on a 5, you're not particularly worried about somebody posting him. Like, who are the bigs in the game that can consistently post him? Now, you'd think Jokic and Embiid. Well, he guarded Embiid pretty damn well in the playoffs. I'm not saying Jokic can't put him on the block a few times, but like you don't feel too uncomfortable if that's the route that teams want to go, is we'll just dump it into the post and try to score on OG Anunoby. I think you feel good as a defense, number one.
Jokic puts Anthony Davis and Bam Adebayo and Rudy Gobert.
And then you get into a pick and roll game where if he's guarding a primary screener and you can just switch everything. And this gets to his point about who you now have guarding ball handlers, because if it's Bridges and Hart, well, you feel even better about switching those actions because the size advantage on the other side of the switch isn't nearly as large when DiVincenzo is guarding the ball. Obviously, when Brunson's guarding the ball. So you've added size and length across those positions. When OG's at the 5, it gives you tremendous options in terms of switching everything on the outset and not feeling like you're conceding too many advantages. You think about what those lineups could look like with OG at the 5. Forget, even if Randle's not in them, now you probably want Josh Hart in those lineups because whatever you're losing rebounding wise, it's really important that Josh can make up for it. And he does mention Josh Hart in that context. Okay, so that's one iteration, right? Is OG at the 5 without Randle. Now he goes later in the interview, he talks about Randle at the 5. And to your point, he focuses on the offensive side of the ball. And I think we've all dreamt of this, and we saw it in New Orleans for a year where he was a wrecking ball of a rolling big. Imagine with how much space he might have. Let's say Josh Hart isn't in that lineup. You literally surround him with shooting. You go all offense. You have OG now in the game, not guarding the main, but you're putting him on the least, probably either the ball, but I think you probably want Bridges on the ball, and you want OG on the least threatening wing on the other team, and you want him roaming the back line. And as a helper and a roamer, you can cover up for some of Julius's shortcomings at the 5 if you want Julius on the big. Whether you're switching everything, which Tom doesn't really love to do with Julius, whether he's in that kind of crappy drop that he plays. Either way, maybe he's trapping the ball. Maybe you go crazy, you get really up-tempo. You trap the ball. You let them go to the short roll. You have OG rotating. You have Bridges rotating. There's so much size on the back line.
Has Julius ever done any meaningful trapping actions up top at the level?
I mean, the Knicks don't really do any trapping. I mean, they really only do trapping against Luka. We
saw glimpses with Hartenstein randomly during the playoffs last year.
Halliburton, they did it a couple. They mixed it in. They'll mix it in. It's usually not with Julius or hasn't been, but that's interesting to me is to have Julius just kind of use his agility to just trap the ball, force point guards to get rid of it. And now you have the back line could look like OG, Bridges, and Hart. I mean, that's a length and size and strength that you don't feel like. You feel like they can compete at the rim with bigs that are rolling and then recover out to 3-point shooters, right? So I think Tibbs was touching on the versatility they have, not just to go small, but to go small in different ways, to utilize his defensive weapons like OG in different ways. He can be on the ball. He can be guarding the center. He can be roaming off of a least damaging wing. All of those can be really successful strategies. And it was exciting to see him kind of at least hint at all those variations. So
you touched on a few things there, and I want to get, the rebounding part of it, he mentions the rebounding where, the question that Ashberger asks is, he says it's vital to have pesky wings, with Boston having Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And then Tibbs talks about how the league has shifted. Your 2s, 3s, and 4s are more wing-oriented now. Guys that could guard 4 positions, in some cases 5 positions, allow you to do a lot more switching. We'll get back to that. And if there's a rebounding component to that, you're not sacrificing your defense. So he doesn't say Josh Hart by name, but like anytime you're talking about you want to go small, but you want to maintain your rebounding, that's obviously code for that's Josh Hart's a bat signal. So that, like, we know that's important to him. And that's, by the way, I think another underrated. I don't want to go back and talk about why he didn't play Julius and Obi Toppin together more, but I think we could agree that rebounding is always in the back of his mind in terms of whether or not he wants to go small. And this is something that, like, again, the personnel here would seem to be more seems to be better equipped at. The switching thing, I feel like I heard Zach Lowe say it on a podcast at some point over the summer. Like, is there a team that switches or has switched less than the Knicks, like under Tibbs? Or maybe, I mean, they're bottom 5, right?
I would think. I mean, the Knicks do switch. Here's the thing: they don't switch Brunson, right? So Brunson's.
I want to get back to Brunson, but
Brunson's going to stay on his man. They pretty generously have switched 2 and 3, and sometimes Julius at the 4, but not often.
Okay.
But yes, they are definitely a lower tier switching team, and they almost never switch to 5, right? I mean, really, really rare occasions will they switch to 5. So yeah, the amount of switching that goes on in the NBA to for your standard coverage, I mean, switching is like a break in case of emergency coverage for the Knicks. So yeah, they are. I don't know. I don't have the stats in front of me, but I'm confident that they're a bottom 10, probably bottom 5 switching team.
Okay. And again, here he is. He's not asked a question about switching. He's asked a question about Boston and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And he voluntarily is talking about these things allow you to do a lot more switching. And which again made me question, like, who is this aimed at? Like, what? Like, why is he doing this? But he said what he said. And again, he's not going to say the thing and then just blatantly not do it. He's saying it for a reason. He's letting us all know he's going to do it.
I mean, to the point about, you and I both came out of the playoffs, and this was, again, my number one takeaway was defensive versatility. It's just the name of the game. And he mentions Boston more than twice in this interview. The idea, their ability to switch across positions and not sacrifice anything. That's the brilliance of Boston. Because Jason Tatum can not a switch onto center, can start on the center.
He did.
And rebound at his position.
In the whole finals.
And Drew Holiday can switch on to anyone and is an elite rebounder at his position. And Derek White is a great rebounder. They are able to switch and run different schemes, guard different types of players, and not sacrifice a thing. And the Knicks very clearly, in their offseason moves and now the way the coach is talking about it, learned that same lesson. Like, we need to be – and Indiana carved them up. They carved them up.
It has not been discussed
in the Knicks standard coverage. They got carved up because it was predictable. Yes, there were obviously injuries involved, and OG's particularly was a killer. But even in the first 2 games, it wasn't like the Knicks were like putting on a defensive clinic, and they struggled to guard Indiana all year long. And their standard pick and roll coverage was exposed at times. So they needed to learn from this playoffs, and they did it in their offseason moves, obviously adding one of the most versatile defenders in the league in Mikal Bridges. And now they lose their center, not on purpose, but they did. They lost their main center, who was the bedrock of that scheme that they played most of the time. And here we are. And the coach and front office seem to have joint minds here in terms of how the team needs to play. And I think that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. I completely agree. I am... It was interesting though, as I was reading this and I was thinking about this, and as I wrote about it a little bit, like, and we've had enough Julius Randle discussions for probably many off seasons, but I do feel compelled to at least bring up again. There is a reason, in part, why he has not gone to this consistently over the course of the 4 years he has coached Julius, and that is because Julius, he is not Draymond Green, as a small ball 5. He presents some challenges defensively. He presents challenges defensively, whether he's playing the 5. He presents challenges defensively, whether he's not playing the 5. And then there were obviously they talk about Jalen Brunson in the interview, but like, Jalen Brunson is not part of this switchable scheme, versatility, defensive wings, all that great, wonderful stuff that you're talking about here. So it's like we still have this fundamental thing where you have 2 Knick defenders who, for various reasons, you need to consider. You need to make sure you are monitoring what they're doing, who they're guarding, and all that stuff. Which is, again, why I'm just very curious to see, like. Because to me, there's 2 different conversations here. There is, what is the stuff that we are going to do to get us through an 82-game regular season in one piece and most effectively? And then there is, okay, great. It's now 2-2 against Boston or Philly, whoever the hell they're playing. Like, what do these next 48 minutes look like? And I think those are 2 different things, right?
Absolutely 2 different things. Absolutely. I mean, you saw it like Golden State in their prime years. Like the death lineup was the death lineup, but they played the death lineup in the playoffs more than they played in the regular season, right? Because again, Tibbs references it. It does take a toll on your smaller guys guarding up positions. It's interesting in a competitive top of the Eastern Conference. It's never been more obvious that the Knicks, to play their best players the most minutes, need to play small. Right? Like, it might come down to that. Like, when we're talking about Precious Achiuwa and Jericho Sims, I like those guys. I'm actually probably higher on Jericho than most.
He mentioned Sims in here. Hold on, I just saw. I'll go find the quote. He said something about Jericho.
Well, he just starts listing names. That's a classic Tibbs platitude. He just starts listing. Jericho gave us good minutes. Mitch gave us good minutes. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Minutes. Jericho Sims started initially, and then he got hurt.
He starts listing his whole roster. That's
Gibson got a shout.
And those guys will play a factor, and will probably be frustrated in some games that they're playing more than we think they should.
Yeah.
But because those are your second and third string centers, and potentially come game one of the season, your first and second string centers, depending on Mitch's health, there's absolutely no question that if you want to play your best players, you're going to go small. And to me, that's the number one test for a coach. How do I get my best players on the floor as much as possible? And the answer here is I got to play without centers sometimes. Well, like, it's clear, right? That's like the way that the roster is designed. So,
and when has that really been true here in New York?
It's never been obvious. It's never been obvious.
It's never been obvious. That's the good way to put it. That is the correct way. It's
never been obvious. It's never been as obvious as it is right now. And it is clear as day. It is clear as day. And like, if you want to get Donte DiVincenzo more than 18 minutes a game, which you have to, because he's one of the best shooters in the league, like, you have to get him more than 18 minutes a game. The only way to do that is to have small lineups. Like, all of this stuff, right? The way the roster is constructed. Now we're hearing Tibbs talk about it like it was all leading that way. The roster dictates it to some extent. But again, it's just good to hear the coach kind of spell it out for you.
I don't know, maybe again, bridge too far probably, but I feel like a light bulb just went off. Maybe that's in part who this was directed at. Because if you're Donte DiVincenzo and you're sitting around and you're just doing basic math, and you're looking, Josh Hart, I put in a different category because, like, Josh Hart, like, who the hell knows what he actually means and what he believes. Like, if he averages 4 shots a game in a season, like, is he going to be happy? Is he going to be miserable? Like, who the hell knows? I don't know. I don't think anyone cares. DiVincenzo, that dude, like, I mean, sorry, Josh.
Yeah.
But DiVincenzo, like, I don't want to say like they have to keep him happy, but like that is, I feel like that's at least a mild concern. Like, you can't play that dude 18 minutes a game and get him, 5 shots a night after we did last year.
No, you can't. And like, not to say, I don't think he would be a bad apple in the he doesn't seem like that kind of guy, especially with like the whole Nova thing. But you reward a guy for a season that he just had, and more than that, more importantly than that, like, Jalen Brunson needs space. Julius Randle needs space. Your best space creator is Donte DiVincenzo by a long shot. I mean, he was a fire alarm last year for defenses by the end of the season. So you got to get him the most minutes. And again, the way to do that is to find ways to play small. And what's going to be interesting, to your point about Brunson and Randle, is I think when he plays the small lineups is going to be interesting. And my bet is it won't be when Randle and Brunson are both in the game. Now, maybe when he closes, assuming Julius Randle's a fixture in the closing lineup, which I don't necessarily think he has to be, but I imagine he will be to start the season, at least.
And again, I reference what I said a minute ago. There's a regular season component to this.
That's right.
And there's a playoff component.
That's right. And maybe the playoffs is where hopefully Randle's a stud all season and playoffs. But if things go haywire with Randle, maybe he goes away from it. My guess is the 10 to 15 minutes are built around when one of those two guys is out of the game. Is literally built around it. So if Jalen Brunson is playing the whole first quarter, or if Jalen Brunson comes out with 5 minutes to go in the first quarter and Julius finishes the first quarter, when Jalen comes out, whoever comes in, or 2 guys sit down and 2 guys come in. Maybe it's Hart that comes in with DiVincenzo, and now they go small for a spell with Julius as the 5. And then when Julius sits, they bring Brunson back and OG's the 5, right? And you build the 10 to 15 minutes that way. That's kind of where I see it, because I am not at all confident that you can build a good small defense with both Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle out there. That seems precarious.
Because we're not, look, Tibbs cares about every minute against every team. We're not talking about a February game against Atlanta. That's not what this team was built to. This team was not built to win that game. And I remain somewhat unconvinced that against a team like Boston that doesn't give you any safe quarter, that you're going to be able to get away with a significant minutes with those two guys on the floor at the same time, almost regardless of whether there's a 5 or not. But like, yeah,
that's tough. That's a tough statement. I mean, I hope Jalen Brunson's Jalen Brunson. He gives it his all. He's just very limited defensively. I think Julius has a place he can get to defensively that he hasn't touched yet.
Maybe that's the biggest question of the season.
I think it's one of them. And, you know, at some point, I mean, he's been in the league a long time already. So I think there's somewhat unlikely that he finds like a new defensive gear, but it's not impossible. And we've seen him evolve many, many times and improve drastically in several different ways over the course of just his Knicks career. So with less of an offensive burden now, with a lot of different guys who can create offense for you, it's not just the hope, it's the expectation now is that he buys in defensively from day one, that he gets back on defense on every play, that he closes out with ferocity and intensity. Like, that's now the expectation. And there are guys that can take your plays if you don't do that. So I am hoping, I think they're going to play together a lot. And I think I
didn't want to imply that, like,
but you're saying against Boston in a playoff series, maybe you have to,
specifically. And by the way, for anybody who like, you're crazy, Macri, how many times have we seen over the years teams get to the playoffs and it's a specific matchup, and all of a sudden something that has been a bread and butter thing for them over the course of a season doesn't go away completely, but like starts to get really, really, really.
By the way, Boston has attacked Randle. Boston has exposed and attacked Randle more than any other team in the league.
Why do you think and you know who talks about it is you. So that's why
because he by default ends up on Jaylen Brown, and Brown is just involved in these screens with Tatum, and they just make him work, and they run their little fade screens, and it's tough for him to navigate all that. So yeah, it's something they're going to have to look at. Again, the way this team is built now, the luxury that you have is you can build good lineups without him, and you can build great lineups with him. And they're going to need both. They're going to need both. And the ball's in Julius's court to some extent as to how much he's involved in their best lineups. I think he can be. I think he's again, as a regular season workhorse, he's extraordinarily valuable. Extraordinarily, he's proven that, and he'll continue. I think I've confidence that he's going to show that again this season, assuming health. Come the playoffs, there's questions. There are real questions. Part of it is how much can you play with Jalen Brunson defensively? Can you hold up on that end? Can you be switchable? Can you navigate various screen actions? And if you can, then you can be part of these lineups. And if you can't, we have other directions we can go, right?
And let's end here. That's why I think your point about the small ball being a feature for when only one of Julius or Jaylen is on the floor, because maybe that's the finish line here is how do we survive the minutes when Jalen Brunson sits in a big playoff game and a big playoff series? It is because we, over the course of an 82 game regular season, have given, I don't want to put a number on it, but like a not insignificant number of minutes to, this is how we play without our superstar guard on the floor. Julius is at the 5. He is unstoppable at the 5 on offense. And we construct a defense with him on the floor where he is the only weak defender. And whatever needs to happen around him to make that work, we are going to, again, have the regular season to figure that out. And that's really, so it's again, is that like a death lineup? No, it's not quite a death lineup, but it is a version in which you are maybe getting the most out of Julius Randle. And that is not to say he's not going to play any minutes with Jalen Brunson in a big, of course they're going to play together in a big playoff game, in a big playoff series. But, you got to pick and choose your spots. I'm curious how those how those line up. I will have time to talk about like the specific play, like how much is Deuce playing in those minutes. Like I don't know. It's another question. I think this is all very interesting.
Definitely interesting and exciting that there's like, it's in some ways Tibbs built this era of Knicks basketball on 48 minutes of rim protection. And it's a real thing. I mean, it became a punchline, but it's like a real thing. Like Mitch and Noel, Mitch and Hartenstein, like were huge for this team. And created the identity that the Knicks kind of were built on from the first year that Tibbs came. And it's not something to scoff at. Like, it's a real thing. And obviously Tibbs also hinted at the fact that he is very upset that Hartenstein is gone. Not that it's the Knicks' fault, but it just is what it is. And that he
knows that there's nothing they could have done.
He knows it was a huge loss. But kind of the next step in evolution for this team now is finding different ways to play. And for a coach who has been known as stubborn and as a guy who only knows one way, that's why this is such an interesting interview and to talk about and to see him really express and understand that this is the evolution of this team. Now this is the next stage, and it makes it really exciting to get to watch it come day one.
That is well said. I don't have anything else. It's fun to talk some hoops with you. We got how long before? Well, we're within 2 weeks of media day, because media day is Monday, September. Was that 30th? Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's when media day is.
Yes.
That's what.
Sure. A voice from somewhere.
Andrew, anything else before we get out of here?
No. This was fun. Yes, 13 days until media day, and then I believe my math is right, 19 days until the preseason opener.
What is it? Who do they open the preseason against? Washington? Or
I don't care, but it's the 6th.
I think they exclusively play Washington in preseason. They play nobody else for 2 straight years. They just play Washington.
They played Minnesota this preseason.
And if you recall,
they played Boston twice last preseason.
I'd just like to talk about that. There was this one guy on Twitter who, after the first Washington game, if you recall, Jordan Poole had like 45 points in a preseason Washington game last year. And this guy was like, Jordan Poole's going to be most improved all-star. Like, it looked like it was his team. And it's actually crazy to think from that first preseason game to what actually ended up happening to Jordan Poole last season.
I mean,
rather remarkable, and tells you preseason means so little, like as little as it possibly could.
Yeah, and I think it's probably going to mean less. Look, we're not quite at the point where like the 82 games for the Knicks is that's the preseason, but like this is the closest we have gotten to feeling like the 82 games are a precursor to what really matters, which makes the preseason like. Really doesn't matter.
The answer to your question is Charlotte. They play Charlotte on October 6th. And actually, I'll back up Benji's point. They play Charlotte and Washington. Then they play Minnesota on a nationally televised Sunday night game on the 13th. And then they play Charlotte and Washington again.
Washington. What
NFL game do they go? Does the Minnesota-New York game go up against?
No idea, but it goes up against the NFL. So...
The Shield.
Yeah. Unfortunately. I'll check what that Sunday night game is, but
I'm just curious. All right.
It's the NFL.
Benji, anything else from you before we get what was it?
I'll just my sole mention of baseball. That's also when the ALDS and the NLDS will be. So Benji and I will be busy.
Keep dreaming.
Oh, you don't think the Yankees will make it?
Oh, yeah. The Yankees are doing just fine.
They're doing great.
Dominguez just homer. All right, love you, boys. I'll talk to you soon. Great to hang for a bit.
See, the moment I brought up that I'm happy about baseball, he's like, all right, I got to go. I've had enough of this.
Benji, thank you for joining us and staying up late after your hoops game. Andrew, thank you for all that you do. You are a brilliant man. And thanks everybody out there for checking out another episode of the Knicks Film School Podcast. We stay tuned for the next interview that we got coming up this week. Again, I teased it already. I'll tease it again. I'm going to try to talk this into existence that it happens. And that is all we're going to say. All right. Later, guys.
It'll also air next week.
That is all we're going to say. That's good.
By the way, the Sunday night game that night is Giants Bengals. So there's a chance that we actually take away from that audience because the Giants their season will have ended by October 13th.
They'll be 0-8.